A letter from her showed up after over a decade. She started it with, "Cashin, I get it. I've got no business reaching out to you after all this time. You've probably got every reason to despise me, and honestly, I wouldn't blame you one bit." She admitted that after everything I went through, after the way she walked out on me, it made sense if I couldn't stand the thought of her. But she had nowhere else to turn. She wasn't begging me to let her off the hook. She knew she didn't deserve that kind of grace. All she wanted was a chance to see me face to face, to hear my voice again, to find out how life's been treating me and whether I could even stand to look at her without bitterness bubbling up. "I messed you up back then," she wrote, and I could feel the weight of her guilt in those words. She thought leaving was the only decent option at the time, like it was some noble sacrifice. But after that, everything in her world just fell apart. Every single thing, Cashin, she made it clear. Each choice she made after walking away turned into a disaster, one after another. She was sure she'd lost me for good, no question about it. Still, she added, if I had even a tiny flicker of curiosity, maybe just enough to meet up one time, she'd be there. Tomorrow, 6:45 p.m., at that spot where we used to sit and dream about what life could be. "I'll be waiting," she signed it, Alara. I must have read that note 10 times, maybe 20, letting it sink in. On my phone, it was just text staring back at me. Plain, innocent little words sitting there. But with every line I read, every pause marked by a comma, I felt this knot tightening up inside my chest. 10 years. Over a decade since she picked someone else over me. 12 years since I sat alone in our cramped little apartment, hearing that door click shut behind her, knowing she was gone for good. 12 years since I tried to trick myself into believing I could keep going without her in my life. And now, after all that silence, she wanted to meet up. My thumb brushed across the screen, lingering on her last words. "I'll be waiting." Waiting for what, exactly? For me to just shrug and say, "Sure, Alara, come on in, let's act like nothing ever happened"? For me to lock eyes with her and feel all those old sparks again? Or maybe I'd actually go, look her straight in the face, and for the first time ever, tell her, no, 12 years back, I was stuck at my desk, tapping my pen nervously on a stack of bills I couldn't pay, racking my brain for ways to stretch my cash until the next measly paycheck. My head was pounding from another night with barely any sleep, spent scribbling down big ideas for businesses I'd never get off the ground without some serious money. I couldn't stand my job, not one bit. The whole corporate mess, the pointless meetings that dragged on forever, the soul-crushing reports I had to churn out. I was trapped in a cubicle, doing stuff that sucked the life out of me, watching the clock crawl toward quitting time. But even with all that, I clung to something, a vision. A hope of creating something that was mine, something that had let me break out of that gray, stifling trap. And Alara? She was my light in all that gloom. For 4 intense years, she was my everything. She had this beauty about her, this bold confidence. She didn't just step into a space, she took it over like it belonged to her. When she laughed, it was like the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders for a minute. But Alara wasn't content with just good times and giggles. She craved a life that dazzled, trips to far-off places, fancy clothes, a swanky place with a killer view of the skyline. And you know what? She deserved every bit of it. The trouble was, I didn't have the means to make it happen. One night, she looked at me and asked, "Cashin, when are things going to turn around for us?" Her tone was soft but steady. We were on the couch in our little apartment, a takeout box half-eaten between us, the flickering bulb overhead throwing shadows on the chipped walls. I could feel her eyes on me, heavy with expectation she didn't say out loud. "I'm trying," I told her, plastering on a grin. "Just give me a little longer. I'll figure it out." She gave a small nod, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in her expression, and deep down, I knew the truth. Time wasn't what she was after. She needed to see progress, something real, and I was running low on both. Then came the night that flipped everything upside down. The apartment was quiet, just a faint hum from the city drifting in through the walls. I was slouched on the couch, poking at some cold leftovers, staring at those same unpaid bills I'd memorized by then. Then I caught it, the crisp sound of her heels clicking against the hardwood. Alara was back home. I glanced up right as she walked into the living room, and man, she looked different. Not worn out from a long shift at work or rosy-cheeked from the chilly air outside. No, that night she was put together, spotless makeup accentuating her features, hairstyle just right, and a sharp black dress that fit her like it was custom-made. She looked like she belonged in some fancy world, a place way out of my league, a spot I could never hope to bring her to. My stomach twisted with this heavy, sinking dread. "Cashin, we've got to talk," she said, her voice way too steady, almost unnaturally calm. I set the takeout box aside, my grip tightening on the couch cushion like I was bracing myself. My chest felt squeezed, like some part of me already sensed the blow coming. "Okay," I replied, doing my best to sound even-keeled. "I'm all ears." She paused, just for a heartbeat, and in that tiny moment, I saw it flicker across her face, guilt. Then she took a deep breath and dropped a bombshell in 4 little words. "I met someone else." The whole room went dead quiet. I could hear my pulse thumping, feel it hammering in my ears. My mouth turned to sandpaper, but I managed to croak out, "What?" Alara let out a sigh, like she'd been holding it in all evening. "His name's Dorian," she said plainly. "He runs a bunch of companies, and he gets what I want out of life." She laid it out so matter-of-factly, like it wasn't ripping me to shreds right there on the spot. A laugh slipped out of me. I didn't even mean for it to happen. It just came, sharp and empty. "You're for real," I said, shaking my head like I couldn't wrap my mind around it. "Cashin," she said softer, taking a step toward me. "I didn't plan for it to go down this way." "Then how was it supposed to go?" My voice broke a little, but I didn't care enough to hide it. Her lips parted like she might say something, but nothing came out, because we both knew the real deal. This wasn't some accident she stumbled into, it was a decision she'd made. I locked eyes with her, hunting for a sign, some hint of second thoughts, a crack of doubt, anything. But all I found was this quiet determination staring back at me. "Why?" I whispered, barely getting the word out. She blinked, and for the first time that night, I saw her cool exterior wobble just a bit. "Because I'm worn out, Cashin," she admitted. "From what?" I pressed. "From scraping by all the time, from waiting around, from holding on to dreams that never turn into anything real." Her voice shook for a second, but she pulled herself together, standing a little taller. "I care about you. I really do, but caring isn't enough anymore. I need stability, a future I can bank on, and Dorian's got that covered." My chest squeezed tighter, and I muttered, "And I don't." She didn't say a word, she didn't need to. My gut dropped like I'd been kicked, and my hands balled up into fists at my sides. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice sounding flat and far away. She looked off to the side, her fingers clutching the strap of her purse a little harder. "I'm leaving," she said. 2 words, just a quick pair of them. That's all she had for me after 4 years together. I let out a slow breath, my eyes drifting to the wall behind her, not really seeing it. "Do you love him?" I asked. The silence stretched out, thick and heavy. Then, finally, she said, "I think I could." Another laugh escaped me, but this time it caught in my throat, almost like a sob. "Whoa," I muttered, dragging a hand through my messy hair. That hit harder than if she'd just said yes. Alara's eyes glinted with something that looked a little like sorrow, but no tears fell, not for me. Anyway. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sorry." Like that one word could patch up the gaping hole she'd just torn open. I clamped my jaw shut and turned my head away, refusing to let her see how bad it stung. If I kept staring at her, I'd end up pleading for her to stick around, and no way was I letting myself sink that low. She started heading for the door, her steps slow and measured, like she was giving me one last chance to stop her. Then she stopped short. "I hope you get it someday," she said quietly, her tone gentle but final. And just like that, she was out the door, gone. Suddenly, I was by myself. The apartment felt way too still without her presence filling it up. For days, I parked myself on that same couch spot, eyes glued to the door like some hopeless fool, half convinced she'd come strolling back in, admitting she'd messed up, that she'd pick me after all, that she still cared. But nope, she never did. Her perfume hung around, this soft, flowery scent I knew so well. It stuck to the bedding, seeped into the couch pillows, even lingered on my shirts hanging in the closet. Every time I shut my eyes, I'd hear that laugh of hers or picture how she'd brush her hair behind her ear when she was lost in thought. Those memories turned into shadows that wouldn't leave me alone. They just kept creeping around, haunting every corner of my mind. Nights were brutal. I'd lie there wide awake for hours, my body wiped out but my brain buzzing like a broken machine that wouldn't turn off. The bed felt massive, empty in a way that gnawed at me. I'd roll over without thinking, reaching for her, only to find nothing but chilly sheets under my hand. I hardly ate, barely said a word to anyone. I quit picking up the phone, stopped bothering with emails or anything work-related. That whole gig felt like a bad punchline. At my desk, I'd just sit there, staring at spreadsheets like they were written in another language, my focus completely shot. I'd roll in late, duck out early. Meetings? Skip those too. One afternoon, my boss cornered me, his tone clipped and irritated. "What's going on with you, Cashin? You look like a walking corpse." A corpse, yeah, that nailed it. That's exactly how I felt, like some hollow shell drifting through life. Nothing seemed solid anymore. The days melted into each other, stretching out long and pointless, no spark left in them. Then Sienna came along. She didn't say a whole lot at first, just showed up out of nowhere. A tap on my door, a coffee cup in her hand, no big speeches or prying questions, just her being there, steady and calm. "Drink this," she said, setting it on the table in front of me. I didn't push back, just grabbed it, letting the heat seep into my hands, and took a sip. She kept coming back, next day, then the day after that. "You've got to eat," she told me one evening, shoving a takeout box my way. "Not hungry," I grumbled under my breath. "Don't care," she fired back, arms crossed like she wasn't taking no for an answer. "Eat it anyway." I sighed but took a bite. It didn't taste like much. She wouldn't let up. When I tried to hole up in my apartment, she hauled me outside, made me walk around, Got me talking even when I just wanted to fade into the background and wallow. One night, I finally broke open. We were up on my building's rooftop, the city lights twinkling below us, a whiskey bottle sitting between us. The air was cool, laced with the faint hum of cars rolling by in the distance. Soft, I rasped, my voice rough and low. She just left, like I didn't even matter. Sienna stayed quiet for a beat, then let out a soft sigh, resting her head on my shoulder. Some folks only stick around when it's smooth sailing, she said. The second it gets tough, they're out the door. I swallowed hard, my eyes fixed on the glowing skyline. Then why does it still ache like this? I asked. She turned to me, her gaze steady and sure. Because you loved her with everything you had, but that doesn't mean she was the one meant for you. I let out a shaky breath, wanting so bad to buy into what she was saying. But right then, it felt like I'd never pieced myself back together. I wasn't sinking under the waves anymore, but I wasn't exactly thriving either, just getting by, going through the motions. Sienna, though, she kept showing up, steady as ever. Some evenings, Sienna and I would just sit there, soaking in the quiet, watching the city lights flicker below us. Other times, she'd nudge me into talking about old memories, my dead-end job, or the future I'd stopped believing could ever happen. Then one afternoon, she barged into my apartment like it was her own place, dropped a hefty pile of papers onto my coffee table, and stared me down with this no-nonsense look. "Cashin, you've got to get moving," she said flat out. I blinked, still groggy from another night of tossing and turning. "Come again." She folded her arms, not budging an inch. "You're throwing away your days, letting your skills rot. You're just sitting here like some empty shell while life keeps rolling right past you." A sharp, hollow laugh slipped out of me. "Oh, you make it sound like a breeze," I shot back. "What? I just stand up and act like everything's peachy." She rolled her eyes hard. "No, you get up and start building something like you always dreamed about." She slid a notebook my way. I grabbed it, flipping through the pages, and there it was, my own scribbles staring back at me. Rough drafts of business ideas, doodles of products, quick cash flow guesses, all stuff I'd jotted down way before Alara walked out, stuff I'd let gather dust. "You should launch your own company," Sienna said, her voice calm but firm. "You've been yapping about it forever, and now there's nothing tying you down." I snorted, tossing the notebook back onto the table. "Oh yeah? With what cash? What tools? What network?" "We'll sort it out," she replied, dead serious. I raised an eyebrow. "We?" She nodded like it was obvious. "You've got the big ideas. I'm good at pulling plans together and keeping things on track. We don't need a ton to kick off, just effort and some grit." I shook my head, skeptical. "Sienna, it's not that cut and dry." "You're right, Cashin, it's not," she said, leaning in closer, her gaze pinning me in place. "But do you really want to keep frittering your life away in this apartment, stuck replaying what went wrong? Or do you want to show yourself you've got more in you than this?" Her words landed like a punch I couldn't dodge. I tightened my jaw, glancing at that notebook again. I'd spent so long obsessing over what I could have changed, wondering if Alara might have stayed if I'd had more going for me, if I'd been enough for her. But this wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. I let out a long breath, raking a hand through my hair. "All right," I said, quieter than I meant to. "Let's give it a shot." And for the first time in ages, I felt a spark, something besides that hollow ache. Determination started creeping in. We burned the midnight oil for weeks, plotting, digging into research, scraping by on next to nothing. Sienna threw herself into it just as hard as I did. We borrowed cash from buddies, picked up odd jobs to keep the lights on, and funneled every penny back into our little venture. At first, it was a whole lot of nothing. Weeks stretched into months with no real wins to show for it. We stumbled more times than I could keep track of, but whenever I felt like throwing in the towel, Sienna would pull me back. "Don't forget why we're at this," she said one night after we lost a big potential client. "This isn't about proving a point to anyone else. It's for you, for what you've always wanted." I'd nod, though deep down, a tiny piece of me still wanted to shove it in Alara's face. Then, finally, things shifted. Almost a year in, we landed our first real break, a small gig with a local outfit. It wasn't huge, but it was a lifeline, something to cling to. Word started getting around after that. One job turned into two, then more. Before long, folks were taking notice. Investors started ringing us up. By the 5th year, we weren't just scraping by anymore. We were solid. By year 12, we built something downright impressive. I stood in the corner office of our downtown building, all glass walls and killer views, gazing out at the city sprawled below. The sun dipped low, painting the skyline in warm gold. That same city that once chewed me up and spit me out, it felt like it belonged to me now. We pulled it off. I wasn't that broken guy Alara ditched anymore. I'd turned into a legit entrepreneur. The business was booming, and my bank account had more digits than I'd ever dared to imagine. Through it all, Sienna stuck with me, a constant presence by my side. She never once fished for praise, even though she'd earned it 10 times over. She just stayed in the shadows, cheering me on through every win and holding steady through every stumble. I'd catch myself wondering why I hadn't truly noticed her back then, really seen her for what she was. Sienna had all the qualities I'd ever hoped for: warm-hearted, fiercely loyal, and patient beyond reason. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't shake the weight of what came before. One night, I was burning the midnight oil at the office when my phone buzzed on the desk. I grabbed it without thinking, figuring it'd be another work email or maybe Sienna checking in with some late-night project note. But then I saw the name lighting up the screen, and my breath hitched hard. Alara. For a split second, I froze, my hand hovering over the phone. 12 years had passed. Over a decade since she'd walked out my door. 12 years since she picked him over me, since I clawed my way up from rock bottom. 12 years of nothing but silence between us. And now, out of nowhere, here she was again. My thumb lingered over the message, itching to swipe it away. Part of me wanted to chuck it into the void, unread, and keep moving forward like it never happened. But I couldn't do it. My heart thumped loud in my chest as I tapped it open. Cashin, it started. I know I've got no right to reach out like this. You've probably got every reason to hate me, and honestly, you should. I leaned back in my chair, my grip tightening on the phone as I scrolled through her words. They pulled me under like a riptide, yanking me back to a place I'd sworn I'd left behind years ago, a place I thought I'd locked away for good. And when I got to that last line, "I'll be waiting," it hit me. This wasn't just some random note popping up out of the blue. It was a challenge, a fork in the road, and for the first time in forever, I wasn't sure which way I'd go. The next evening, I showed up 15 minutes early. The cafe sat nestled in a cozy little pocket of the city, a spot I used to escape to when I was just starting out, needing a quiet place to think. It was like stepping into a time capsule. Same soft glow from the lights, same sturdy wooden tables, same rich coffee scent wafting through the air. My pulse was racing like crazy. I grabbed a seat by the window, my fingers tapping a restless beat on the tabletop. Outside, the sky was a gentle mix of pink and gold, the city settling into its evening rhythm. Then she appeared. Alara stepped through the doorway, her gaze sweeping the room until it landed on me. She paused, just for a heartbeat, before heading my way with that smooth, graceful stride I used to know so well. For a second, it felt like the years melted away, like we were right back where we started. But as she got closer, the illusion faded fast. Her hair was shorter now, falling in soft waves around her face, not the long, dramatic style she used to rock. Her outfit was still classy but toned down, nothing like the flashy designer stuff she'd favored back then. And her eyes? They weren't the same. There was a weariness in them, a depth I didn't remember seeing before. "Cashin," she said quietly, stopping just in front of me. "Alara," I answered, keeping my voice even and cool. She gave me a small smile, tentative, almost breakable. For a moment, we just stood there, neither of us making a move. Then I got up and nodded toward the chair across from me. "Take a seat," I said. She eased into it, setting her bag down beside her on the floor. We sat there for a bit, neither of us jumping to fill the quiet. I watched her, waiting for her to kick things off, but she seemed okay just sitting there, her fingers brushing along the rim of her coffee cup like she was gathering her thoughts. "You don't look all that different," she said eventually, breaking the stillness. I let out a little laugh, leaning back in my chair. "Funny, I was thinking the same about you." She dropped her gaze, a flicker of something, maybe regret, crossing her face. "No, I've changed a lot," she murmured. "More than you'd guess." The air between us got heavy, thick with unspoken stuff that made it hard to breathe easy. I wasn't sure where this was headed, but I had a hunch it wouldn't be a smooth ride. "I didn't expect to hear from you," I said, keeping my tone steady and neutral. "It's been what, 10 years? 10 years, she repeated, her voice so soft it barely carried. "And now you want to chat." Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and for the first time, I saw something raw peeking through, something vulnerable. I didn't know where else to turn. "Cashin," she said. "I had to see you." "Why?" I asked, my voice holding firm. "What are you after, Alara?" I asked, cutting straight to it. Her mouth opened like she had an answer ready, but nothing came out. She just dropped her gaze to her coffee, her fingers gripping the cup tighter. "I've missed you," she said after a long pause, her voice shaky and uncertain. I didn't say a word, just waited for her to keep going. "It's tough to put into words," she went on. "Over the years, you've crossed my mind so many times. I'd wonder how you were holding up, what you were up to. And now, sitting here, seeing you like this, it's clear you've turned into everything I always knew you had in you." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she brushed them away quick, like she didn't want me to notice. "I just hate that I was too stubborn to see it back then," she added. Those words slammed into me harder than I'd braced for. I'd played this scene out in my head a million times. What I'd say, how I'd carry myself. But now that it was real, I felt off balance, like I hadn't prepped for the right test. I didn't hold you back, I said, keeping my voice steady and solid. You picked your path. I know, she replied, her voice cracking like it might break apart. And it's the biggest regret I've got. I leaned in a bit, resting my elbows on the table, my eyes locked on hers. So why now, Alara? After all this time, what's bringing you back here? She hesitated, then sucked in a deep breath. Because my whole world crashed down. Dorian's company tanked. He walked away and left me with nothing, no home, no savings, no plan. And it hit me. I threw away the one true thing I ever had, us. Her words floated there between us, thick with sorrow and second-guessing. Back then, I thought I was making the smart move. She pressed on, tears spilling down her cheeks now. I thought I was chasing something solid, but I got it all wrong. I've been wrong about so much. Her voice shattered, and she buried her face in her hands, trembling. Seeing her like that, so wrecked, so exposed, stirred something deep in me. But it wasn't what it used to be. It wasn't love anymore, just a quiet kind of sympathy, maybe even pity. You had something good, Alara, I said softly. You tossed it aside for a fantasy that didn't hold up. And now you think I'm going to swoop in and patch it all back together? She lifted her head, her eyes wide and desperate, searching mine. I'm not asking for the whole world, Cashin. I just want a shot to set things right, to prove I'm not the same person I was. Right then, the cafe door swung open behind me, and I felt a familiar energy step into the room. Sienna. Her gaze caught mine first, then darted to Alara. She pieced it together in a flash. She gave me a single nod, a small, supportive smile tugging at her lips, before heading to the counter. Alara's eyes trailed after her, then snapped back to me. Who's that? She asked, her voice low and edged with something sharp. Someone who's always stuck around, I said plainly, keeping it simple. Her expression darkened as she sized me up, her glance flicking back towards Sienna at the counter. You didn't answer me, she pressed, her tone tight. Who is she? I leaned back, crossing my arms over my chest. She's my partner, my rock, someone who's had faith in me even when I didn't have it in myself. Alara's jaw clenched hard. Partner? Like in business? In all the ways that count, I said, my stare unwavering. Her lips parted, her breath picking up speed, like she was trying to crack a code she'd missed all along. You're in love with her, she whispered, more like she was stating a fact than asking me to confirm it. I didn't jump to respond. Instead, I glanced over at Sienna. She was by the counter, stirring her coffee with that easy calm she always carried, but I knew she could sense the tension over here. I'm not sure if it's love, I said after a beat, my voice deliberate and even. What I do know is she's never bailed on me. She's never sized me up and walked out when things got messy. Alara's eyes brimmed with tears again, but these weren't soft or sad, they were hot with frustration. I never stopped caring about you, Cashin, she said, leaning closer across the table. I messed up, big time, I get that. But that doesn't mean we can't mend what's broken. We've got all this history, doesn't that still matter to you? It did matter, I said, my tone sharpening as I sat up straighter. For a long stretch, it meant everything. But you made your call, Alara, I said, laying it out plain. You went with someone else, someone you figured could hand you a bigger, shinier life. And now that it's all crumbled, here you are, not because you're still in love with me, but because you're out of options. Her face crumpled like I just knocked the wind out of her. That's not how it is, she insisted. I've never stopped loving you. Back then, I didn't know how to deal with it. I was terrified. I was clueless. But I'm standing here now, trying to fix what I broke. You're here because you want to redo history, I shot back. But that's not how it works. What's done is done. The air in the cafe turned thick, heavy enough to choke on. For a beat, neither of us said a thing. You were my safe place, Cashin, she murmured, her voice shaky and raw, like she was grasping at something slipping away. I've been wandering aimless without you. I leaned in closer, my gaze pinning hers. You had that safe place, Alara. You chose to walk out on it. Her hand shook as she reached toward mine, but I didn't budge an inch. Please, Cashin, don't toss this aside, she begged. Give me a shot to make it right. We could be amazing again, better than we ever were. I studied her, really took her in, and for the first time, I saw past the haze of what we'd had. It wasn't the rosy memory anymore. It was the truth of who we'd turned into. You're not the same woman, Alara, I said quietly. And I'm not that guy anymore either. Her eyes widened, desperate. We could figure it out together, Cashin, grow into something even stronger this time. I shook my head slow. We grew in different directions. You just didn't see it, till the gap got too wide. Her voice climbed, edged with a frantic note. You're wrong, we can hit reset. You said you've changed, and so have I. I'm ready to put in the work for us now. Work. A dry, bitter laugh slipped out of me. Where was that effort when I was the one who needed it? You didn't stand by me back then, Alara, you bailed. And now you think I'll just act like it never happened. I screwed up, she cried, her voice splintering apart. Doesn't everyone get a do-over? Not always, I said, my tone soft but firm, my eyes steady on hers. Not when the first shot was ditched without a second thought. She slumped back in her chair, stunned into quiet, tears spilling over, unchecked this time. I really thought she started, but the words faded out, like she couldn't finish the thought. You thought I'd still be here, waiting, I filled in. You figured you could stroll back in whenever it fit your schedule, and I'd still be that same broken guy you left behind. Her silence confirmed it. I'd hit the nail square on. People evolve, Alara, I said, softening just a touch. And sometimes they outgrow what they used to chase. Her lips quivered. I never wanted to hurt you. I believe that, I replied, but that doesn't erase the fact that you did. The cafe felt smaller all of a sudden, like the walls were pressing in, the weight of our old life bearing down on us both. Alara looked like she had more to say, but her voice stayed trapped. I pushed my chair back slow and stood up. Take care of yourself, Alara, I said, keeping it simple. She lifted her head, her eyes wide and pleading. Is this it? Goodbye for real? I glanced toward the door where Sienna stood, her gaze warm and steady, always there, always getting it. It's goodbye to what we were, I said. Time for us both to keep moving forward. Alara gave a slow nod, her shoulders sagging like the fight had drained out of her. Maybe you're right, she mumbled. I turned and headed toward Sienna, my step sure, my chest feeling lighter than I'd expected. I stopped for a second, locking eyes with Alara, those eyes that used to pull me in deep, make me lose track of everything else. Not anymore. You went for the cash instead of me, Alara, I said, my voice cool and sharp, every word intentional. And now? I've got the money, everything you were always after. But here's the kicker, her lips parted, trembling, like she could guess what was coming but couldn't believe I'd say it out loud. You're not what I'm after anymore, I finished, my words cutting clean through the air. The color washed out of her face, she looked lost, truly adrift, like she'd run out of moves to make. Cashin, please, she whispered, her voice fracturing into pieces. I didn't want it to turn out like this, Alara started, her voice faltering. I messed up, but no, I cut in, shaking my head slow and deliberate. You picked your road, Alara, you went with him, and now you've got to deal with how it played out. I leaned in just a touch, dropping my voice. Here's what sets us apart. When the going got tough, you took off. Me? I started from scratch, built something real, grew into someone new. And now? I don't need you, not back then, not today, not ever. She sat there, locked in place, tears pooling in her eyes, ready to spill over. I could tell she wanted to argue, to plead her case, to claw her way back in, but the words stayed stuck in her throat. I didn't give her the chance to find them. Goodbye, Alara, I said, firm and final. This time, it's for keeps. I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind as the streetlights cast their dim glow over the fading day. The door chimed softly as it closed, shutting that chapter of my life for good. Sienna was waiting outside, leaning against the wall with her coffee in hand, looking relaxed as ever. The night air felt sharp and cool, and the warm light from the lamps caught the glint in her eyes. She tilted her head a bit, giving me that steady look of hers. All wrapped up? She asked, her voice smooth and calm like always. Yeah, I said with a small nod. It's done. She watched me for a second, like she was checking for cracks. You holding up okay? Better than okay, I replied, surprised at how true it felt. We started walking down the quiet street, our steps matching up naturally. For a while, we didn't say anything. The silence wasn't heavy or weird. It was that easy kind you only get with someone who really gets you. Thanks for sticking around, I said after a bit, glancing her way. She flashed a smile. Where else would I go? We took a few more steps before she stopped short, turning to face me square on. You know, she said, her tone shifting. I've been right here with you for years, but I've never seen you look this unburdened, like you've finally dropped something you've been hauling around too long. I have, I said, stepping closer. And it's because of you. Her eyes widened just a fraction. Me? Yeah, I said, my voice softening. You've been my constant, Sienna, through every flop, every win. You saw something in me when nobody else bothered, and I wouldn't be standing here without you. A warm breeze brushed past us, and I realized how close we were, close enough to feel the shift in the air. You're a big deal to me, Cashin, she whispered, her eyes holding mine. You're everything to me, I said back, my voice barely carrying. The city noise faded out around us, leaving just the two of us in that moment. I reached out slow, almost unsure, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't flinch. Then it happened. I leaned in, and our lips met. It started gentle, cautious, like we were stepping into something fresh yet somehow already known. Her arm slid around my neck, and all at once, everything clicked into place, better than it had in years. When we pulled back, her eyes were bright, a grin tugging at her lips. Well, she said, her tone teasing, you sure took your sweet time with that. I laughed, my chest lighter than it had been in forever. Yeah, I can be a little slow on the uptake. She shook her head, her smile growing. Late's better than never. We stood there a while, wrapped up in each other, the night stretching out soft and peaceful around us. Months rolled by, and life settled into a new groove, different this time, easier, brighter. That old heaviness from the past? It was gone, replaced by something solid, something true. Sienna and I kept pushing the business forward, but it didn't swallow us whole like it used to. Success wasn't about flexing for the world anymore, or proving a point to anyone else. It was about carving out the life we'd always pictured, side by side. One Friday evening, Sienna was stacking folders on my desk when she piped up. We should take a break. I quirked an eyebrow. A break? What's that supposed to mean? She laughed, leaning against the desk. You know, time away? No work, no meetings, no inbox? Just living a little. It sounded almost alien at first, but the more I mulled it over, the more I saw how much we'd earned it. All right, I said, snapping my laptop shut. Where are we headed? Her face lit up like a kid's on Christmas. Anywhere. Everywhere. How about we kick it off with Italy? Italy sounded like a dream, and it was calling our names. Sienna and I roamed the winding cobblestone paths of Ravello, stuffing ourselves with pasta and sipping wine on sunny terraces with views of Umbria's rolling hills stretching out below. She had this knack for making pals wherever we landed. Her laugh rang out bright and free, and her endless curiosity pulled everyone in, me included. One afternoon, we plopped down on a bench in a peaceful little piazza, just watching folks wander by. She rested her head on my shoulder, her hands settling over mine. This feels like we've stepped into someone else's world, she said, her voice quiet and warm. It's our world now, I told her, squeezing her hand. And we're just getting started. From there, we hopped over to Cyprus, sailing around the islands, plunging into crystal-clear turquoise waves and catching sunsets that painted the sky behind those whitewashed villages. In Ithaca, we staked out a tiny cafe perched above the sea, our makeshift office for the week. Not a shabby spot to get stuff done, I said, nursing a strong espresso. Sienna flashed that grin of hers. I could live like this forever. Back home, things didn't let up. The business kept climbing, but we figured out how to juggle it with the stuff that really counted. We carved out time for weekend treks through the woods, late-night movie marathons, and slow Sunday mornings with stacks of pancakes and jazz spinning on the record player. We didn't need to slap a name on what we had. It was enough knowing we were a team, through thick and thin. One night, we were up on our building's rooftop, the city lights twinkling below us like stars. Do you ever dwell on what's behind you? Sienna asked, her voice soft as she leaned into me. Not really, I said, shrugging. It's like it happened to someone else. She nodded, pressing closer. It did, but I'm glad it led us right here. Me too, I said, planting a kiss on her forehead, feeling the truth of it settle in. 18 months later, we were back in Italy, not just for kicks this time. We'd scored an invite to speak at a big business conference in Naples. Standing on that stage, staring out at the crowd, I couldn't help but think about the road we'd traveled. Success isn't about the cash or the clout, I said, my voice steady and sure. It's about who you're building it with, the ones who stick around when it's rough and cheer with you when it's smooth. If you find those people, don't let them slip away. The room burst into applause, but my eyes zeroed in on Sienna in the front row, her smile wide, her gaze glowing with pride. That night, we strolled along the Rio Tormes walk, the city lights dancing on the water. You killed it up there, she said, sliding her hand into mine. Only 'cause you got me this far, I told her, pulling her in close. She laughed, nudging me playfully. Pretty sure you did the heavy lifting. Maybe, I said, wrapping an arm around her, but I'd have crashed and burned without you. We kept chasing new horizons, Spain, South Korea, Iceland. Every stop brought something fresh, something stunning. We'd work when we had to, but we lived even harder. In Jeju, we wandered through towering bamboo groves, the quiet sinking into our bones. In Marbella, we danced till the sun came up, losing ourselves in the rhythm. In Reykjavik, we stood on a cliff's edge, hooked up for a tandem bungee jump. I can't believe you roped me into this. Sienna yelled, her voice half laugh, half panic. You're the one who said we should spice things up. I shouted back, grinning as we leaped into the air, hollering and laughing all the way down. Back home, we snagged a place out in the country, a big white farmhouse with a porch that wrapped all the way around, surrounded by green fields that went on forever. It was everything we'd pictured. We dug into planting a garden, brought home a scruffy rescue pup we named Orion, and spent long nights swaying on the porch swing, counting stars. Life wasn't flawless, never is, but it was ours, and that was plenty. One evening, as we sat there with Orion sprawled at our feet, Sienna turned to me, her eyes thoughtful. Would you ever let someone back in after they ditched you for a shinier deal? I took a slow breath, letting the question settle. Nah, I said finally, glancing at her. If they walked away once, chasing something they thought was better, they don't get to just waltz back in when it flops. I've got everything I need right here, why mess with that? She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder again, and we let the quiet night wrap around us like a blanket,